Have you ever listened to a podcast and walked away thinking, wait, I actually see life differently now? These aren't productivity cliches. These are episodes that change how you think about habits, growth, identity, emotions, and decision-making. For each one, I'll tell you what the episode is really about, why it matters, and what you can take away from it in real life. And stick around for episode 6. It's one of the most perspective-shifting conversations I've ever come across. Welcome to Quarks Podcast, a space where curiosity meets calm.
Psychology and Human Behavior. Exploring Psychology and Human Behavior with Michael Gervais. The psychology of identity and fear of judgment. If you have ever felt like you are capable of more, but the fear of what others might think quietly holds you back, this conversation explains why that fear exists and how high performers learn to work through it. What is this podcast about? Scott Barry Kaufman sits down with performance psychologist Michael Gervais to break down the psychology behind fear of judgment, self-criticism, pressure in high-stakes environments, and how people unintentionally limit themselves through inner narratives. Gervais explains that the problem isn't talent, it's the internal dialogue built around fear, approval, and identity protection. They talk about why the brain chooses safety instead of growth, how performance anxiety forms, and why many people don't express their potential, not because they can't, but because they are afraid to be seen failing. It's not motivational talk, it's real psychological mechanics of behavior. Why it matters. Because most barriers in life are not external. They are fear of embarrassment, fear of criticism, fear of not meeting expectations. This episode matters because it helps you recognize those fears as patterns, not personality flaws. And once you see the pattern, you can challenge it. What you learn by watching this podcast. You will learn why high performers feel fear even when they're skilled, how self-trust develops through action, not confidence talk, why avoiding discomfort reinforces anxiety mental training habits used by elite performers. You don't learn shortcuts. You learn how your mind behaves under pressure and how to work with it instead of running from it. Why you should watch this podcast. Because if you've ever held yourself back quietly, this episode helps you understand why that resistance exists and gives you the awareness to finally push through it, deliberately and consciously. Meaning and identity, James Hollis. If you've ever felt like you're living life on autopilot, or like you're following expectations instead of your inner voice, this conversation will hit you in a way most podcasts don't. What is this podcast about? In this episode, James Hollis talks about identity, purpose, adulthood, and the inner journey we rarely stop to examine. He explains how many people build their lives around roles, obligations, fear, or comfort, and only later realize they never asked a deeper question. Is this life truly mine, or just the one I drifted into? The conversation goes into the difference between outer success and inner fulfillment, how identity shifts across stages of life, why we repeat emotional patterns without realizing it, and what it means to live with psychological responsibility. This isn't motivational talk. It feels like a conversation with someone who has lived, reflected, and looked inward for decades. Why it matters. Because most people never stop to examine who they are becoming. We chase goals, careers, approval, stability, but rarely question whether those choices align with our deeper self. Hollis reminds us that meaning isn't automatic, identity isn't fixed, and growth often requires confronting uncomfortable truths about ourselves. This episode matters because it forces you to slow down and reflect on your life's direction, not from pressure, but from honesty. What you learn by watching this podcast, you will learn that identity is something you grow into, not something you're born with. Why purpose isn't about achievement, it's about alignment with your inner values, how unexamined beliefs shape relationships, work, and self-worth, and why self-reflection is a lifelong discipline, not a one-time realization. Most importantly, you learn that meaning is created through awareness, courage, and conscious choices, not luck or external success. Why you should watch this podcast? Because this isn't another productivity or self-help talk. It's the kind of conversation that makes you rethink the path you're on, question what truly matters, and see your inner life with more honesty and depth. If you've ever felt lost, stuck, or quietly unsatisfied, this episode won't give you quick fixes. It gives you clarity. And sometimes, clarity is the beginning of transformation. Science and Future Thinking. Marc Andreessen. Marc Andreessen on The Tim Ferriss Show, full episode. If you want to understand how technology actually shapes the future, not from hype or headlines, but from someone who has lived inside major innovation waves, this conversation gives you that inside perspective. What is this podcast about? Tim Ferriss interviews Marc Andreessen, a key figure in Silicon Valley history. Instead of talking about gadgets, they discuss how technological revolutions really happen, why some ideas scale globally while others disappear, how markets, behavior, and culture shift around new technology, and what it means to think long-term in a fast-moving world. Andreessen explains innovation through systems, incentives, and historical patterns, not buzzwords. They also dive into entrepreneurship mindsets, how founders think differently, and how technological progress compounds over decades instead of moments, why it matters. Because the world changes faster than people realize, and most people react to change instead of understanding it. This episode gives you a strategic mental lens for interpreting business, technology, economic shifts, and the direction society moves in. It's about understanding why the future unfolds the way it does. What you learn, how real innovation spreads into everyday life, why timing and culture shape technological adoption. Thinking models used by entrepreneurs and investors, how to position yourself ahead of long-term shifts. It doesn't teach trends, it teaches future literacy. Why you should watch this podcast. Because if you want to think like a builder instead of a spectator, this conversation gives you the perspective to do that.
Creativity and problem solving, 10 lessons from the smartest minds in the world. If you've ever wondered how great thinkers approach problems differently, this episode distills real insights from multiple world-class conversations into practical thinking lessons. What is this podcast about? This episode isn't a single interview. It's a curated compilation of key ideas from several high-level guests on decision-making, creativity, learning a mindset, and problem-solving structures. Instead of quick tips, it focuses on how great thinkers design their thinking process before they act. It highlights themes like reframing problems instead of reacting to them, pattern recognition across fields, simplifying complexity through structure, and building thinking habits instead of relying on instinct. Why it matters. Because most people respond to problems emotionally or impulsively. But progress comes from changing the lens you use to think about the problem itself. This episode gives you tools for meta-thinking, thinking about how you think what you learn, how experts reduce complexity to essentials, how structured thinking leads to clarity, why good decisions come from good frameworks, mental models you can apply in real-life situations. It turns deep thinking into something practical and usable. Why you should watch this podcast? Because if your goal is to upgrade your thinking, not just your productivity, this episode gives you insights that genuinely reshape how you process challenges. Identity and society. Jay Van Bavel. If you've ever noticed how people behave differently in groups than they do alone, this conversation explains why identity changes in social environments and how that shapes real-world behavior. What is this podcast about? Scott Barry Kaufman speaks with Dr. Jay Van Bavel about group identity, belonging and tribal behavior, social cohesion and conflict, and how group membership influences how we think and act. They explore why people defend group beliefs emotionally, how belonging shapes self-worth, why identity becomes stronger inside social environments, and how crowd psychology affects decision-making. It blends psychology plus society plus human behavior in one framework. Why it matters. Because identity isn't just personal, it's social. Understanding this explains political polarization, workplace culture, social conflicts, and why people react defensively to ideas tied to their group. This episode gives language to dynamics people notice, but rarely understand. What you learn, how identity forms through social context, why groups influence behavior subconsciously, how belonging shapes beliefs and actions, how to recognize group-driven thinking in yourself. It helps you see the invisible psychology inside human behavior. Why you should watch this podcast. Because once you understand identity at this level, human behavior stops feeling confusing and starts feeling explainable. Integrator Josh Waitzkin, Huberman Lab. If you want to understand how learning, mastery, psychology, and self-awareness connect into one philosophy of life, this episode ties it all together in a way few conversations do. What is this podcast about? Andrew Huberman talks with Josh Waitzkin about deep learning, intuitive skill-building identity through training, performance mindset, and reflection as part of growth. They discuss how intuition develops from repetition, how to stay adaptable under pressure, why self-awareness strengthens performance, and how mastery is a lifelong process, not a destination. The conversation blends science, philosophy, discipline, and inner work. Why it matters. Because learning isn't just about skills, it's about who you become while developing them. This episode shows growth as something integrated, mental, emotional, and behavioral at the same time. What you learn, how experts build intuition beneath conscious thinking, why reflection multiplies improvement, how identity forms through practice, how adaptation and awareness work together. It's less about technique and more about a way of living and thinking intentionally. Why you should watch this podcast. Because this conversation doesn't just inspire you, it reshapes how you think about learning, success, and yourself. It's the kind of episode you carry with you afterwards. All 6 conversations point to one truth. Real growth isn't loud. It's consistent, reflective, patient, and deeply personal. If one of these stood out to you, watch the full episode because the real lessons are inside the conversations themselves. This is Quarks. Thanks for watching.